Yes, it's true. I am not coming back. Thank God. This has been 10 years of fun, but the last couple have been a bit frustrating. It's true, I was gavelled 4 times by Frank Chop, and he let me finish my speech. I couldn't believe it. Usually you get 3 times and they make you sit down. This is kind of an interesting time, I think, in our country's history. Last night I was at the Mountains of Sound Greenway board, Mountains of Sound has been an interesting group that I think has tried to bring people together of diverse opinions and actually have a conversation. It was interesting to be there. I told them when they were all done that we should actually, some of you should run for the legislature because you actually had a conversation, which is lacking many times in environmental policy in Olympia in general. I get very frustrated, and one of the reasons I'm getting out, to be honest, is I think we've gotten wrapped up too much in politics and forgot about policy. The environment's important to all of us, isn't it? I mean, that's why we're here, really. The reality is that we, back when I first started, I was very frustrated with some of the environmental policies. It was one of the things that got me into government. And I found that, in fact, that my opponents, many of them, wanted the same things I wanted. Here's the thing to remember as we're talking about public policy. You know, we all think it's very important what we do. Those of us that are members here, which by the way, my greatest honor and my professional honor in my whole career here was to be elected to the House of Representatives. My greatest disappointment, however, was getting there and finding out who else got elected. I realized I really wasn't special. We're just average people trying to do something good. I still think it's a noble profession, but the reality is that we're inundated with a lot of information, and we're trying to make decisions, good policy decisions, and when there's not the conversation, it doesn't work. And remember, the people, again, that we're dealing with back home, 40% of these people, I mean, you got 30% on the right, 30% on the left, and the 40% in the middle, they just want to have retirement, they want to have a job, they want to raise their kids, they might want to put their kids in college, they want a clean environment, they want to be able to go hike up in the Middle Fork, or come over and camp in the Tiana Way. They might want to go fishing and actually see fish. They don't want to kick cans off the beach or worry about cutting their feet on glass. There's all these things. They want clean water. They want to be able to, if they buy a vacation place, God forbid that many people can do that nowadays, but buy a vacation place in eastern Washington, be able to go drill a well and do it, and actually build their home. Well, right now that's being threatened too. We've got to remember who we're serving as elected leaders. And as people who are concerned about this thing, we have to look for solutions. That's been my frustration. Let me give you an example. So here's, you think you got a great idea. So there was this septic system that was failing, a small regional septic system, and it will remain nameless, but over in the Puget Sound area, lower Puget Sound area, and I had a great idea. I thought, let's make an amendment to the Growth Management Act so that we can extend public services outside of the urban growth area so that we can provide services. And I qualified it. I said, if there is an environmental emergency or imminent threat, i.e. imminent threat to water quality, imminent threat to drinking water, and you would think that this would be embraced by everyone, wouldn't you? So I went to the chair of the committee and I said, well, I won't say who it was, unlike him. I actually have to go down there and maybe talk to people next year. But the reality is, I said, so here's a great idea. And she goes, love the idea. Go talk to the 1,000 Friends of Washington and see what their lobbyist says. And if she says, okay, I'll run a hearing. And I was just so disappointed. I mean, so each of you should ask yourself, really, is that what we've come to? That we let one person stop us from even having a conversation? I'm afraid that's what's happening. One of the other things, by the way, I'm talking about what's frustrated me in the last 10 years, actually 16 years. I was a county commissioner for 6 years and 10 years in the state. Some of the things that have frustrated me over the years. I'm a guy who likes results. So as you know, I was a paramedic, right? And I can remember a friend of mine, I wasn't on shift, it was a shift before me, and he said, we had a really interesting cardiac arrest last night, Bill. We came in, and here's a lady She's, in her 60s, and her husband is in, 60s, 70s. He's laying on the floor, cardiac arrest, not breathing. And we're doing CPR on him, and of course, I asked what history he had. He has a cardiac history. He's been very sick. Okay, so they go along doing the resuscitation, trying to get this guy revived. He hadn't been down that long, they didn't think. And for some reason, nothing was working. They were literally emptying their drug box on this guy, and throwing the paddles to him and doing everything they could to save him. And they couldn't figure out, why isn't this working? They checked his blood sugar. Is he diabetic? What's going on? And then it occurred to him, let's do a better exam on the patient. So they rolled him over, and guess what? There's a big stab mark in his back. His dear wife, who was supposed to be the one looking out for him, had stabbed him in the back. And of course, unlike the movies, there's not a big pool of blood underneath you sometimes when you get stabbed. And they found that this light isn't working. Now, what does this have to do with anything, right? So let me ask you, what would happen if there was an oil tanker that dumped $6.3 to $8 million, or 8 million gallons of oil in the Puget Sound one time, just once? What would happen? What do you think we'd do? Would we go crazy? Would we have protests? Would we have volunteers lined up to try to help clean up the Sound? And yet, that's what's happening every year, drop by drop. You might have saw the article a couple years ago. We're getting that much oil is coming off our transportation system into the Puget Sound, and we got the Puget Sound, every Puget Sound group there is trying to clean up the Puget Sound, the Puget Sound Partnership. Look at their strategy. Look, we spent $18.1 million in the last 3 biennia, and a lot of it has been dealing with land use. Now, again, stop the bleeding, okay? Why can't we get focused on what's really happening? It's true, we need to look at all the, LIDs and look at, good development practices, and we need to look at preservation and those kind of things. But where are we putting our money? You know what I contend? I contend we need a Dave Ramsey of the environment. Anybody know Dave Ramsey? Okay, he's telling you, what do you do to get out of debt? You pay your high interest cards off first, right? Well, we got a high interest card that's breaking the bank right now in the Puget Sound, and it's called our transportation system. We're creating new stormwater regulations. We're putting burdens on local governments. We're putting burdens on developers. We're buying up property. Are we making a lick of difference? Somebody nod their head. Are we making any difference? Can we measure it at all? This should concern us. I don't care what stripe you are. I'm talking to Republicans and Democrats, all Washingtonians. The Puget Sound is what we have. It is us. It is the thing that brings people here. It's a unique body of water. It's beautiful. Even that island that Hans Dunshee bought a couple years ago for the state, it's really nice. You can canoe all around it. But we've called them out already once. The reality is, let's focus on that. Why aren't we putting the money that we spend on the environment, why aren't we concentrating on getting this thing taken care of? Why aren't we focusing on supporting municipalities and counties and building stormwater infrastructure? Because we can do it. It can be done. Instead, we want to do everything. We have to have the holistic approach. And so frankly, you know what it is, folks? We're trying to keep every little environmental group happy. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to satisfy all the people, and so what's happening is the patient's going to bleed out. We'll have nothing left. This is a heritage that we can't afford to lose, and yet, here we are. Continue to spend money on things like that. I just don't get it. Let me tell you about another thing that frustrates me is a SEPA. We have a little bit of, arguably, a decent bill. It moved us forward some. What was SEPA supposed to do when they put it together? Well, it was supposed to do a good environmental analysis, identify impacts before a project, and actually help you fix things so that you can move forward, create jobs, protect the environment, provide industry and homes for people. And then we have the Growth Management Act that comes along, and we have an act that's supposed to provide some predictability for developers so we can, predictability for investment in infrastructure. I mean, there are many goals, but I'm focusing now around the good that I see and that the developing world sees and a lot of the business world sees with Growth Management Act, to provide some predictability and some discussion about where we're going to locate our infrastructure, where we're going to locate public facilities, capital facilities. Those are things that are really important. How, designating resource lands of long-term commercial significance. These are important things. Agricultural lands, forest lands, mineral lands. I'm going to focus on the mineral lands for a minute because this is where I go crazy. So every year or every time they update, whenever they update at the counties their mineral lands document, they're supposed to go out and identify mineral lands of long-term commercial significance. Now, we did a study back in, when did I get elected? I think it was in 2003, 2004, we did a study on the need for aggregate in this state for our infrastructure development, and it's huge. We are not there right now. We can't catch up, and part of the reason is the permitting process. Just by the way, I worked on a reclamation plan or permit that was 5 years in the making. And it was like pulling teeth. I won't get sidetracked on that. But the reality is that, so here we go and do this designation, and we're supposed to do a SEPA review on our comprehensive plan reforms. This is what the county does. They do a SEPA review. But what do? Do they really do a SEPA? They go through a checklist, and they say, oh, this will apply to project-specific stuff. Now, folks, I'm sorry, but that's not the way it's supposed to work. If you're going to designate mineral lands, shouldn't you have some assurance that it's going to be used for mineral lands? I mean, wouldn't you think? Because I can tell you the forest lands and the ag lands, that's what they're getting used for. But with the mineral lands, here's what we do, is we do a partial SEPA, and we don't identify with those lands what really needs to happen to protect the environment, to protect the shorelines. Excuse me. This is my frustration. We need to do SEPA early. We need to do the reviews early. It saves money. It provides predictability. It actually, get the public engaged at the beginning. This is what planning's about. Or are we just providing an infrastructure to stop things? Because that's what it looks like to me sometimes. It doesn't look like we're trying to actually help improve the environment, protect the environment, provide predictability, provide, some direction for financing, because financing these things is really important. But instead, it looks to me like we're trying to stop things. Anybody else got that idea? So, the Shorelines Act and GMA have a lot to offer. And here's the problem. I know we complain about them. I was on the Shorelines board for a couple years, and I was very interested to see that you want to have some inner check in your gut. How many of you know Kayleen Cottingham? Used to work for the former DNR. Kayleen Cottingham and I in 2 years disagreed on one decision. Yeah, I know, I did a gut check, and so did she. Why is that? Because the law is the law. Local governments provide their shoreline acts, and if they're deemed, credible and consistent with the state, great. But we spend millions of dollars, again, on lawyers and fighting projects, and we're unwilling to actually say, folks, what are we trying to do? We need to use SEPA differently. We need to use a public process differently. We need to understand that this is not about just stopping things. It's about actually protecting the environment, restoring the environment. It's about getting results. That's why we do these laws. And it's like politics. I tell you, you get the government you deserve. True story. How many of us vote right now? We all vote, but the percentage of voters right now is not very high, if you look comparatively to other countries in some respects. So we need to come up with a system where we understand what results are. We understand that it's not just that I want to impose my will, that I want to impose my philosophy. It's not about, me getting mine and stopping my neighbor. By the way, where I live, that's the favorite thing to do. The last person that moves to Clallam wants to shut the gate at the top of the pass. The reality is America is about freedom. It's about everybody being able to accomplish their dreams and actually enjoy the environment they live in. And we spend a lot of money on lawyers, we spend a lot of money on process, and we don't get the results. I think, from my perspective, in the end, as I leave Olympia, I hope that we can move more towards result-oriented efforts. We can demand results. It's up to us. I mean, really, are we going to let it keep going? You know, in closing, one of the frustrations if you do the polls on candidates or on voters, the environment's not ranking real high right now. To the politicians, they like that. They can ignore it during the election. But as soon as they get elected, then it seems to be a lot of what our job is. I think we have to raise the awareness about what we're actually doing. We need to raise the level of concern, and not just what we're hearing from the different environmental groups, but reality. This is a call for reality, folks. As I leave, please. Without reality, we're destined to repeat the same mistakes that our forefathers have. There's too much going on. Look at the Colorado River. How much? I think I have about a minute left. I wanted to remember one thing. Whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting. Right now we have, 10 years ago I told the public health officials, I said, your greatest challenge, public health officials, your greatest challenge in the next decade will be to deal with water. And they laughed at me and said, what are you talking about? Domestic water use, especially in rural areas, we've built a whole system on domestic wells without any idea of what the cumulative impacts are. That's true. That's a concern a lot of people have. How we deal with that. How we deal with the fact that the dream of every American is to buy his little place out in the mountains and drill a well. And now you can't do that in the mountains of Kittitas County, not without buying water somewhere else. And this is going to spread throughout the state. We have to pay attention to not just water quality, but water quantity, how it's affecting not only industry and jobs, but our individual hopes and dreams. It's sad. I have 120 acres up on top of the mountain. I have an 800-foot well. I can't use it because I didn't have a building permit. And there's many people like me. These are things that we have to address. We have to find real, we can't run away from it. We can't just say, let's go back to where it was 10 years ago. These are real issues. Let's face the reality. Let's work together for results. That's my plea. And thanks for having me.